Welcome to today's deep dive. Imagine you're standing 10 meters away from a target.
Mm-hmm.
You're holding an air rifle, the pressure is immense, the crowd is dead silent, and you are entirely motionless.
Right. Complete stillness.
Yeah. And in this environment, a millimeter's sway or a split-second delay in your brain's processing speed is the difference between gold and absolutely nothing. Your mind has to be perfectly sharp.
It's an incredibly high-stakes scenario.
It really is. But how can anyone, a coach, a scientist, or even you, actually measure that invisible sharpness without breaking your concentration? That's the mystery we are unpacking today.
And it's a fascinating one.
So our focus is a recent study titled Machine Learning-Based Classification of Alertness Levels in Elite Shooting Athletes Using Heart Rate Variability. It's authored by Jiaojiao Lu, Jun Qiu, and Yan An.
Yes.
And this research was published online in the Journal of Sports Science and Medicine on June 1st, 2026.
It is a truly remarkable piece of literature. What these researchers have essentially done is, well, they've mapped the hidden architecture of human focus.
Right.
They sit right at this intersection of sports science, cardiology, and artificial intelligence. They're proving that our hearts broadcast our exact level of cognitive fatigue long before our conscious minds even realize we're tired.
Wow. And, if you're listening to this, you don't need to be an Olympic shooter to care about cognitive fatigue.
Oh, absolutely not.
If you've ever felt your focus slipping during like a brutal 3-hour afternoon meeting, or you're staring at a spreadsheet and suddenly realize you haven't actually absorbed a single number in the last 5 minutes, this applies to you.
We've all been there.
Yeah. We're going to explore how your autonomic nervous system betrays those lapses in attention, and how scientists are teaching computers to basically read those invisible physical signals.
Yeah, to really understand the magnitude of what the researchers achieved, we have to look at the baseline problem of high-stakes precision sports.
Okay, set the stage for us.
So athletes in the 10-meter air rifle event have to maintain a state of extreme psychophysiological readiness, which we formally term vigilance, for incredibly extended periods.
Right.
It is a grueling exercise in sustained attention. You have to completely inhibit all external distractions while executing perfectly timed motor commands.
But the paradox here is you can't really measure that vigilance using traditional tools, right? Like a coach can't just walk up to a shooter in the middle of a high-stakes training block, tap them on the shoulder, and ask them to, fill out a questionnaire rating their focus.
Exactly, because the act of measuring the focus destroys the focus.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And the alternative isn't much better, to be honest. We have highly accurate neurophysiological tools like EEG brain scanners or advanced eye tracking rigs.
Sure.
They provide flawless data on cognitive load. The problem is they require paste-on electrodes all over an athlete's scalp or strapping bulky visors to their faces.
Which would completely ruin their performance.
Right. It ruins the ecological validity of the environment. An athlete cannot perform their natural, nuanced biomechanics while tethered to a supercomputer.
Okay, let's unpack this. So we have this massive need for a tool that is objective, totally non-invasive, and continuous.
Yes.
And to build that tool, the researchers set up an incredibly rigorous baseline experiment. They recruited 83 elite national-level shooting athletes from Shanghai.
And these are highly trained individuals.
Averaging about 18.4 years old. And they specifically restricted all the testing to a 90-minute window in the morning between 8 and 9:30 a.m.
That time restriction is actually a crucial methodological choice.
Why is that?
Well, human alertness and heart rate variability are not static. They are heavily dictated by our circadian rhythms.
Ah, right. Biological clock.
Exactly. Throughout the day, our autonomic nervous system experiences diurnal fluctuations. Hormones spike, core temperature shifts, digestion alters blood flow.
So if they had tested like one athlete at 8 in the morning and another at 4 in the afternoon,
the data would be hopelessly contaminated by the body's natural clock.
Okay, controlling for the circadian rhythms makes perfect sense. So during this strict morning window, every athlete wore a Polar V800 heart rate monitor capturing electrocardiographic, or ECG, data at a sampling frequency of 1,000 hertz, meaning the monitor is taking 1,000 individual snapshots every single second, just to capture the precise millisecond-level distance between each heartbeat.
Which, by the way, is vastly different from a standard consumer smartwatch, which might only sample at a fraction of that rate to save battery.
Right. You need that microscopic resolution.
You do. To predict brain function from the heart, you need that millisecond by millisecond detail.
Now, here is where I got a bit tripped up in the methodology.
Oh.
Yeah. To establish a baseline of when these athletes were actually losing focus, the researchers used a test called the PVT, the Psychomotor Vigilance Task.
Yes, a very standard tool.
Right, but look at what they actually do. The athletes just sit there with a keyboard, staring at a blank screen. At random intervals, anywhere from 2 to 10 seconds, a red square and a timer appear, and they have to hit the spacebar as fast as humanly possible.
Well, that's the task, yeah.
Wait, so they just sit there pressing a spacebar when a red square appears?
Yeah.
How does a reaction time test mimic the intense pressure of Olympic-level shooting?
I know, it seems overly simplistic. Until you examine the temporal structure of the test, the PVT is widely considered the gold standard in sleep and cognitive research for quantifying decrements in vigilance.
Because it isolates something specific.
Exactly. It isolates the central nervous system's raw processing speed. There's zero learning curve. You don't get better at pressing a spacebar by practicing. It strips away all the technical skill and leaves only your raw neurological preparedness.
Oh, I see. So it's impossible for the athlete to compensate with their technical shooting skills. If their brain is lagging, the spacebar reveals it immediately.
Precisely. And the endurance factor is what makes it highly sport-specific in this case. The researchers ran this PVT for a full 60 minutes, divided into 6 10-minute blocks.
Oh, wow. 60 minutes of just watching for a red square.
It wasn't arbitrary. A typical 10-meter air rifle event lasts roughly 60 minutes. By forcing the athletes into this monotonous, unpredictable visual reaction task for an hour, they perfectly simulated the sustained, agonizing focus required during a real shooting series.
Where they repeatedly aim, control their breath, and execute trigger pulls without any prolonged cognitive breaks.
Right. It's a perfect simulation of the mental drain.
Okay, that temporal match definitely clarifies it. And the threshold they set for failure was incredibly strict.
Very strict.
Yeah, the researchers flagged any reaction time over 500 milliseconds, so just half a second, as a definitive state of suboptimal alertness.
Because in this specific test, a normal, highly alert reaction time hovers around 200 to 300 milliseconds.
Right, so a half second is actually a massive delay for them.
Exactly. When a human takes longer than 500 milliseconds to respond to a sudden, highly salient visual cue, we aren't just seeing a slow physical movement.
What are we seeing?
We're observing a microlapse in attention. The central nervous system essentially glitches. The signal from the optic nerve reaches the brain, but the executive function momentarily fails to initiate the motor command.
That's wild. Okay, so we have an hour of keystrokes mapping every single brain glitch and 1 billion data points of heartbeats. How does a computer bridge that gap? I mean, how do you map a sluggish finger to the rhythm of a heart?
Well, the researchers utilized specialized software called Cubios to tear the raw heart rate data apart. They didn't just measure beats per minute.
What else did they look at?
They extracted mathematical features across 3 distinct categories: time domain, frequency domain, and nonlinear features.
I see those terms thrown around constantly in health tech articles. Let's break them down. If I'm looking at a readout of a beating heart, what is a time domain feature?
Think of the time domain as the most literal interpretation of the data. It looks purely at the chronological spacing between your heartbeats.
Okay.
If your heart beats, and then beats again 800 milliseconds later, and then 810 milliseconds later, the time domain analyzes the variance in those raw durations. It calculates the standard deviations of those physical gaps.
So it's basically just measuring the literal elasticity of the timing.
Exactly. Now, frequency domain analysis is a bit more abstract.
How so?
Instead of looking at the gaps, it uses a mathematical operation called a Fourier transform to convert those heartbeats into waves of energy. Much like separating an audio signal into bass, mid, and treble frequencies.
Oh, it's interesting.
Yeah, our autonomic nervous system sends signals in waves. The sympathetic nervous system, which drives stress, operates on a different frequency band than the parasympathetic nervous system, which drives relaxation.
So by analyzing the frequency domains, the researchers can see which invisible nervous system wave is currently dominating the heart.
You've got it perfect.
And what about the nonlinear features?
Well, the human heart is not a perfect machine, right? It's a complex, chaotic biological system. Nonlinear features measure the entropy or the mathematical unpredictability of the heart's rhythm.
So it's looking for hidden, chaotic patterns that standard statistics just can't capture.
Exactly.
Okay, so they take this massive mountain of time, wave, and chaos data, and they feed it into 4 different machine learning algorithms. Support vector machine, random forest, XGBoost, and AdaBoost.
Yes, those were the 4.
But before we get into which one won, I really want to talk about their first attempt at training these models. Because the AI stumbled in a really revealing way.
You did, yes.
Yeah, initially, the researchers tried to get the algorithms to classify the athlete's alertness into 3 distinct categories: high, moderate, and low. But the AI failed terribly at recognizing the moderate phase. Why is moderate focus so hard for a computer to understand?
What's fascinating here is a concept called boundary confusion in physiological signals. Biological transitions are incredibly rarely sharp. When an athlete shifts from high alertness to low alertness, their nervous system doesn't just flip a switch, it slowly drifts.
It's like trying to grade a paint swatch that shifts from solid blue to solid red.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah, it's easy for a computer to identify the pure blue side and the pure red side. But if you ask it to draw a definitive line exactly where purple begins and ends, it fails. Because purple is just a messy combination of the 2 extremes.
That captures the mechanical flaw perfectly. The physiological signature of moderate alertness was just too ambiguous. The algorithms were constantly misclassifying the middle ground, pulling down the accuracy of the entire system.
So how do they fix it?
They made a crucial methodological pivot. They abandoned the tertiary system and shifted to a binary framework.
They just threw out the middle.
They discarded the messy middle, 40% of the data entirely. They trained the AI to only look at the absolute extremes. The top 30% of fastest reaction times labeled optimal, and the bottom 30% labeled suboptimal.
So they're stripping away the noise so the computer only learns from the purest signals.
Exactly. And once they did that, the algorithm started performing.
And the AdaBoost model absolutely crushed the other 3. It achieved a 75% accuracy rate. The study also mentions it hit an F1 score of 0.73 and an area under the curve, or AUC, of 0.77.
Those secondary metrics are vital for proving the model's validity, by the way. Accuracy alone can be really misleading if your data is unbalanced.
What does the F1 score actually tell us?
The F1 score essentially grades the model's ability to balance false alarms, so predicting a lapse when there isn't one, against missed catches, which is failing to spot a real lapse. An F1 score of 0.73 proves the model is genuinely balancing those risks.
Okay, and the AUC?
The area under the curve is essentially the model's overall grade for how well it separates the optimal state from the suboptimal state across all possible thresholds. A 0.77 AUC indicates a strong, reliable, predictive capability.
I mean, I understand the statistics validate the model. But if you are a listener familiar with the tech world, a 75% accuracy rate might actually sound a bit low.
I can see why people might think that.
Yeah, we're used to facial recognition or language models hitting the high 90s, and I've read other psychophysiological studies where algorithms tested sleep-deprived normal people like truck drivers and hit 89 or 90% accuracy.
Right.
So why did this highly sophisticated AdaBoost model only hit 75%?
We have to contextualize the biology of the subjects.
Hmm.
The researchers refer to this phenomenon as the ceiling effect.
The ceiling effect.
Yes. The 83 subjects in this study are not normal sleep-deprived office workers or truck drivers. They are elite national-level shooters. Years of rigorous training have fundamentally rewired their autonomic nervous systems to be exceptionally stable.
Oh, I see. It's like trying to spot a wave. In a sleep-deprived normal person, the loss of focus is a giant crashing wave. It's easy for AI to spot.
Exactly. Their physiological data shows a massive jagged spike.
But in an elite athlete, their autonomic radiation is so fine-tuned, their loss of focus is just a tiny ripple on a perfectly still pond.
That's it exactly. An elite shooter is literally trained to suppress physiological reactions to fatigue. Their performance and their biological rhythms remain rigidly consistent with only microscopic variants.
Wow.
Expecting the AI to find a lapse in an elite shooter is like expecting someone to find a microscopic scratch on a flawless diamond, whereas the general population is more like a shattered window pane.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah.
So the fact that the AdaBoost model can find that microscopic scratch 75% of the time in a population actively trained to hide it is actually a massive triumph for the algorithm.
It really is.
Yeah.
Which brings up the architecture of AdaBoost itself. AdaBoost stands for adaptive boosting. It differs fundamentally from something like a random forest model.
How so?
Well, a random forest uses bagging. It builds hundreds of independent decision trees and just averages their guesses together. AdaBoost, however, uses boosting. It builds a simple model, sees which specific data points it got wrong, and then builds a second model specifically designed to fix the errors of the first.
Oh, so it sequentially learns from its own failure.
Yes. In an environment with incredibly subtle physiological changes, that sequential error correction is exactly why AdaBoost succeeded where the other algorithms plateaued.
That makes the AI feel much less like a magic black box and more like a targeted investigative process. But we still have the biggest question here. What was the AdaBoost algorithm actually investigating? We know it works, but what specific heart metric predicted the brain glitch?
Right, the why.
Yeah, here's where it gets really interesting. The researchers used a SHAP analysis to figure this out, which basically reverse engineers the AI's decision-making process to show us which data points it valued the most.
SHP analysis is brilliant for this.
And the number one predictor of suboptimal alertness was something called VLF percentage, followed by the SD2-SD1 ratio.
Yes. SHAP analysis, which stands for Shapely Additive Explanations, is a revolutionary tool in machine learning because it destroys that black box problem we just mentioned.
It shows you the math.
Exactly. It mathematically calculates the exact weight every single feature contributed to the final prediction. It definitively highlighted VLF percentage, which stands for very low frequency percentage, as the absolute most critical predictor.
And it wasn't just a general correlation, right?
No, the analysis revealed a specific directionality. Elevated VLF percentage values in the heart strongly predicted a microlapse in the brain.
Okay, but wait. This is where the biology seems to contradict the outcome for me.
How do you mean?
Well, everything I've learned about the frequency domains of heart rate variability says that very low frequency bands are tied to foundational non-cognitive bodily functions.
They are, yes.
They track thermoregulation, so your body temperature, and deep hormonal activity, like the renin-angiotensin system, which controls blood pressure. If I am trying to shoot a tiny target, why on earth would my body's internal thermostat dictate my mental focus?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it's actually a counterintuitive finding until you apply a theoretical framework known as the neurovisceral integration model.
Neurovisceral integration model.
Yes. This model maps the neurological highways that connect the brain's executive control centers to the heart's autonomic pacemakers. You have to consider the physical reality of shooting. It is a quasi-isometric state.
Meaning they're holding entirely still, they're burning very few calories, moving almost no muscles, but their brain is operating at maximum capacity.
Exactly. The sport requires intense, top-down cognitive control and emotional regulation, but it operates with almost zero metabolic demand.
Right.
When an athlete is truly locked in, their brain's prefrontal cortex is actively suppressing baseline bodily rhythms to maintain absolute physical stillness. The brain is dominating the nervous system.
But when that top-down cognitive focus begins to fatigue and slip,
The brain's grip loosens.
and when the brain's grip loosens, the body's baseline autopilot just kind of takes over.
That is the exact mechanism. When vigilance drops, the slower integrative physiological rhythms, like thermoregulation and hormonal blood pressure control, which are represented by the very low frequency band, they reassert dominance in the heart rate variability.
Oh, wow.
So an elevated VLF percentage isn't causing the loss of focus. It is the physiological echo of the brain relinquishing control back to the body's basic maintenance systems.
The athletes aren't reacting to sudden stress. They are struggling to manage deep, slow-wave neuroregulation over an entire hour.
Precisely. The AI isn't looking for a spike in stress. It's looking for the exact millisecond the brain stops suppressing the body's thermostat.
That is fascinating. And the second most important feature AdaBoost relied on, the SD2-SD1 ratio, it seems to back this up.
Does.
Because that ratio comes from a nonlinear mathematical tool called a Poincare plot, which essentially maps out the balance between your long-term heart rate dynamics and your short-term heart rate dynamics.
Right. By tracking that ratio, the algorithm is measuring the athlete's global autonomic adaptability.
So it's about endurance.
Exactly. In a marathon, you might care about short-term reactivity. But in a quasi-isometric precision sport, the ability to maintain neurovisceral integration under monotonous, high-pressure conditions over a long duration is the true marker of success.
So the AI learned that long-term adaptability is more predictive of focus than any immediate short-term physiological panic.
Yes, the AI figured out the specific biology of the sport.
We have taken an incredible journey here today. We started with an athlete pressing a spacebar for an hour, captured a billion data points of their heart rhythm, used a sequentially learning algorithm to filter out the messy middle ground, and discovered that an elite shooter's focus is fundamentally tied to how well their brain can suppress their body's deepest, slowest maintenance rhythms.
It's a brilliant study.
So what does this all mean? Pulling back to the real world, what is the practical application of this?
Practically speaking, the integration of continuous ECG monitoring with the AdaBoost framework provides sports scientists and coaches with a validated, completely non-invasive tool. By deploying this algorithm, they completely eliminate the need for behavioral tasks like the PBT during training camps.
Because the heart monitor just does all the work in the background.
Exactly. This mathematical framework cuts psychophysiological testing time by over 90%. Coaches can monitor an athlete's pre-competition readiness in real time, making data-driven adjustments to their training load without ever pulling them off the firing line or breaking their concentration.
And from a broader scientific perspective, it proves that you cannot take a one-size-fits-all approach to human biology in artificial intelligence.
Absolutely. The paper definitively proves the necessity of sport-specific or population-specific machine learning models.
Because of the ceiling effect.
Yes. You cannot take an algorithm trained on the shattered physiological window pane of a tired office worker and apply it to the flawless diamond of an elite athlete's nervous system.
Bespoke artificial intelligence, designed for highly specific human nervous systems. To dive deeper into the methodology, the brilliant setup of the PVT, and to actually see the SHAP analysis graphs breaking down the AI's logic, we highly encourage you to read the full article in the Journal of Sports Science and Medicine.
It provides a paradigm-shifting perspective on psychophysiological monitoring, truly.
And as always, don't forget to follow the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss our future explorations into cutting-edge science. We've covered massive ground today, bridging the intense physical discipline of an elite air rifle range with the invisible mathematical algorithms mapping the human heartbeat.
It really does leave us with a profound concept to consider, though.
Oh, what's that?
Well, this raises an important question. If our hearts are constantly broadcasting our exact level of cognitive fatigue through these slow-wave, deeply integrated frequencies, what happens when everyday wearable technology, not just in elite sports, but built into the steering wheels of our cars or the smartwatches we wear at our desks, starts using these exact same machine learning models to read our invisible rhythms?
Wow. We might be rapidly approaching a world where we can never fake being awake or focused ever again. The machines have learned to read the rhythm of our attention. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive, and we'll catch